What's up guys, welcome back with another video, and today we're going to go over how I set up the Porsche in Assetto Corsa Competizione. So we're going to go basic start out. I already have a setup and what I want to feel with the car, but we're going to get rid of all of that. Okay, so we're going to start out with the aggressive preset. Okay, so here is the aggressive preset for the Porsche. Now, looking through all of it, knowing what the setups are in this game, none of this is right. But let's go do a quick lap. So just on the out lap, car very understeery, but that's to be expected. Alright, about to head over the line for the first lap. So far, this server, my best lap is a 5.4. Not the best. So I broke a little bit earlier than usual there, and with the brake bias being so high, I locked up and understeered. Understeer there. Let's not worry too much about the invalidations. Oh my god. So the car just does not have any stopping capabilities. And we're already about a second and a half down. Granted, I could probably drive better than this, but it's not the point of the video. I can't brake at my braking markers. It's impossible. You can do it, car. I believe in you. Oh my. Wow. I didn't think it'd be this bad on this track. Okay. A lot of work to do. Let's go back to the garage. So, I'm an idiot, and I accidentally forgot to go over the tire pressures, which is the most important thing. So, this is present Zach is about to go and put this in front of past Zach and all the other stuff I've already covered. So just stick around and wait for the other stuff. So we're gonna go into the tire section here, and I just did a lap with setup I've partially made. So as we can see, I know that these are wrong because this thing just reset up. It was about 27.3 on the front left. So let's go up 3 clicks. Go up 2 here. The rear right was pretty high. Let's go down and go up. So each click is about 0.1 of a change in the hot PSI of the tire. So we'll see how that is. So let's move down into the toe. Now, ACC and a lot of other sims have the toe pretty messed up, and it's not simulated quite accurately. So we're not really even going to go over genetics of how the toe works. We're just going to go maximum on all 4. Sometimes I do change the rear toe for a little bit more rear stability, but for maximum pace, maximum toe. And doesn't harm the tires, doesn't do really anything. So same thing with camber. Okay, so the reason you want camber is whenever you have negative camber, think of it, the bottom of the tire is moving further out of the body line of the car. So if we're looking at a top down, say the tire would be out here. That's just exaggerated, but I'll put up an image to help you show, or maybe a little bit of B-roll of how the tire works. So when you have the maximum camber and you are making a left-hand turn and all of the weight shifts to the right of the car, and that tire is already has a lean on it, and when all the weight shifts, that means the tire is going to be straight up and all of the contact patch will be contacting the ground. So again, max camber pretty much everywhere. All you want, the more camber the better. Okay, so moving on to caster. Now caster and camber work hand in hand because it's how the tire is angled. I'll put a picture describing all of the different uh, what each toe, camber, and caster, what they look like and what they do to an actual tire. But simply speaking, the more caster, which means you will get the ability to have more camber. So I usually go around 10. Now, if you go to the max camber, you will start to get high speed understeer or mid corner understeer, usually in higher speed corners. So then you can start to dial it back. But I usually keep all the setups around 10. Just keeps it nice and simple. Okay, guys, back to the garage. Now, the first thing, we are going to do the quick stuff. Front brakes, 2 are basically for 2 hours up to 24 or up to 12 hours, so 2 to 12 hours of a race. 3 is a wet pad that isn't really used unless it's very, very wet. 4 is kind of a quali pad, kind of not. I would advise against using it unless you're specifically hot lapping. So brake pad 1, good to about 90 minutes of a race. 90 minutes to 2 hours. Somewhere in that ballpark. But for me, the first thing I like to start with is the aero tab. Now looking down here, the percentage base, this is different for every single car. So don't think 1.7% on a Porsche is the same as 1.7% on a Mercedes. So with the Porsche, and the Porsche specifically, this is a Porsche heavy setup guide because that's mainly the car I drive. You want, on most tracks, your max rake. Okay, so for the Porsche, and this is a specific Porsche setup guide, I don't really drive any other car, at least not at the moment. You basically always want to have a minimum ride height on the front. The reason why is because the fuel tank is in the front of the car. So if you're on a quality lap, there is not a lot of weight on the front of the car, and you want that front to be able to generate downforce. To generate downforce, you want it as low to the ground as possible. Simple enough. So let's go to 53 millimeters for the ride height. Now the front splitter, pretty much on every setup I've ever made for this car, 0. I think with having the front splitter, you basically create too much front downforce, considering you have already so much produced with such a low front end with so much rake. So when you have a splitter, you create more downforce and you just cause the fronts to not have any bite. Okay, so moving on to the rear of the car. Okay, also let's go back. Front brake ducts at this temperature, we'll go 3. So the back of the car, I know specifically for the Porsche that there is only 3 tracks in the game that I know of you don't run max wing. That is Monza, Spa, and Bathurst. So crank that bad boy up to 12. Now, as you can see, when we go from 9 rear wing, we have a 3.2 front based. Now remember, this percentage is based off the front axle. So 3.2% aero variation. So that means right now the front has a positive downforce, which means more oversteer. Positive is oversteer, negative is understeer. Hypothetically speaking. So let's go to 12. But the most important thing when it comes to setups is everything is a compromise and nothing is black and white. So just because this says, oh, I have a 0.6% positive aero balance, which means I'll have oversteer at certain points. It doesn't necessarily work that way. So after that, I will go do another lap. But first, let's get rid of the fuel. So I'll catch you guys for the next flying lap. The out lap. It also is about this time I will change the brake bias. So pretty much typically with the Porsche, on most tracks, I start with about 47%. Some tracks you'll have to go a little bit less, some a little bit more, some throughout the track. Okay, for the second flying lap with tweaks to the aero balance. So the brake bias made a big change there, as I could brake in my normal spot. Shut up, Coda. Why do you?
Your lap time is invalidated. Please try to stay on the track.
So the car feels a ton better. Still has oversteer, or understeer. Still has understeer. Okay, so as we enter the back straight, car feels a lot better. It still has a lot of understeer, more specifically through the high speeds, but we're making progress.
Losing time in sector 3.
Okay, so back in the aero tab, I think 74 is a good ride height for the Porsche here, so we're not going to change that. All we lowered was the front ride height and went up on the rear. So let's move over into the electronics tab. Porsche, you can get away with usually 2, 3, TC1, ABS, keep it at 3. TC2 you can play around with. I usually go 2 and 2, and usually leave it around there for most tracks. Sometimes I'll go a little bit higher on this if I'm getting too much excessive wheel spin. So let's move into the bread and butter, meat and potatoes of the setup, the mechanical grip section. Now we're going to make it really simple for the Porsche. Again, this is not a setup guide on what all of these settings do. This is a setup guide on the Porsche and how I set it up. So we want a very soft suspension in the Porsche. The reason why is that keeps the car nice and smooth over the bumps and keeps it as low to the ground as possible most of the time. Super soft suspension. And another thing, so we'll just move down, we'll go straight to the bump stop range. Now, the bump stop range on the front of the car determines how much travel the suspension has. So the higher the bump, with this line going up, This is all the space the spring has to travel. See that? So say if I go to 16, it goes down to about the third line. So again, for the Porsche, we try to keep it under 20 because this affects a lot of the balance of the car. So if we have it at 0 and there's no movement, that means the suspension is has nowhere to travel. So it stays at the same level all the time. So if you're taking a corner and you hit hard on the brakes, it has nowhere to go, basically. The front stays exactly where it was and you lose a bunch of downforce. You're not gaining anything from having the car so low. So typically in the Porsche, we keep it about 20 and below. Now, the higher this value is the more oversteery, the lower, the more understeery generally. And also, that means the car is harder to drive. So let's go to about 17 on that. We're going to leave the rate the same for now. Okay, so now we're going to move to the rear of the car. And it is uh, pretty much the complete opposite of how the front works. So the more travel you have, that means the car can get planted more. It can sit its butt down and drop the diffuser low to the ground, inherently creating rear downforce, but that means more understeer. So up at 50, you can see all the travel. Down low, less travel. So basically, having the range at 0 means you're restricting the rear suspension from moving too much, which means you keep the rake angle the same most of the time. Obviously, situations differ, but you want to keep that rake angle, that nose down, and the back up as much as possible in this car. So typically, most tracks leave it at 0. But if you're struggling with some traction out of corners, you can go up. But anything more than 5, and you're going to be hurting yourself. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the anti-roll bars. Now, what the roll bars do, they either help shift the weight side to side or prevent it. Very simple. And another oversimplification of how these work is the stiffer the front, so more to the right, means more understeer because with the car being stiffer, you're not allowing it to transfer weight to the side. So you aren't never optimizing the grip on whichever side tire you're trying to push the weight to, which is normally the outside tire. So for the Porsche specifically, I go 1 or 0 on my front anti-roll bar. Now let's move to the rear, and it's the complete opposite. So if you want the further to the right, the more oversteer you have, typically mid corner. Because when you think about it, if you're braking and you're turning the car, say you're turning the car to the left, you're on the brakes hard, the front's compressing, and you're shifting the weight to the front right tire. That tire is doing all the gripping. So as the car rotates and moves all the weight to the back as you get on the gas, now you're moving it to the rear right tire, and that's what this is controlling. So that's mid corner to corner exit that this controls. I'll put a little graphic down here on which one works which side. So for the Porsche, I usually try to go 2 to 4, somewhere around there. That's usually a good middle ground. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a smaller thing, and that is the preload differential. Basically, the farthest to the left, you will have understeer whenever you get on the gas. Further to the right, you will have oversteer when you get on the gas. Now, in a lot of cars, this doesn't make a massive difference because every car feels the same, but in the Porsche, on throttle, off throttle coasting is very sketchy in this car, so I recommend not doing it a lot of the time. If you're going around a high speed corner, you're always at 5 to 10% throttle application, but mainly I usually just leave it somewhere in the middle. and leave it there. So let's go out and do another lap. Okay, so after we changed a lot of different stuff, let's go in for a hot lap.
Your lap time is invalidated. Please try to stay on the track.
As you can tell, the car is much more lively. Okay, so the tire pressures are a little bit off, but we will go into that. Oh, that was just completely my fault. Kind of rough sector 3. So I wouldn't really call that. I would call it felt a lot better than the other laps, obviously. So let's go back. So we were about 0.8 faster. And granted, it was probably a 206 flat if I didn't mess up the one corner. But there still is a little bit of time left in the setup. So let's let the qualifying thing run out and we'll get back in. Okay, back for another lap. I may or may not have spun, so we're not going to talk about that. But spinning usually means the car setup is going in the right way. Because that means we're getting oversteer now, which is what we want in this car. It's how we drive it the fastest, and that's why it's so tricky to control. Small mistake into the S's, but that's usually pretty normal. I would judge that down to driving, not setup. But if you are getting a bunch of oversteer into a chicane like that, or not chicane, into the S's, you can try to see everything as a compromise, where if you want to maintain stability throughout high speeds, you'll lose speed to the slow speed. But you can try lowering the rake to around 73. That helps keep the car a little more stable. You can add bump stop range in the rear. That allows the suspension to travel a little bit more and hopefully give you a little more grip. I would advise against touching the rear roll bar, as I think it will be too detrimental to the rest of the lap. So we're coming around 26 or 206 flat. A lot of time just in my driving, but I think for a base setup, that's going to be good. So we're going to call it right there, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And that is how a basic overview of how I go about setting up this car for quality. And then in the race, realistically, all I do is go a click, maybe 2 clicks of brake, depending on fuel load. Okay, so when you want to set the car up for a race setup, pretty much, since you add fuel and the fuel is in the front of the car, you add fuel, the front of the car dips down, the rake goes up. But as that fuel burns off, the rake slowly starts to go down. So basically, you want to add a click of rake to just help keep the front end balance consistent throughout a race stint. Okay, yeah, that's going to be it for the basic setup guide on how I set up the Porsche. For quality, for a race, there's a little bit, a couple tweaks. Basically, the rake, you just go up a click on the rake to help the car balance out more over a stint. But other than that, everything else is fairly straightforward. A couple things I would change, but that's with a lot of tweaking, and we're not even getting into dampers. But if you guys could subscribe and leave a like on the video, it helps the algorithm and it really helps me out. And I would thank you guys a lot for that. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you have a good rest of your day. See ya.